Hello everyone, this is Dr. Carlos Galera Zarco. Welcome to this new session in your module Big Data and Business Analytics. Today, the topic that we are going to cover is data-led decision making. So basically, we are going to achieve three different learning objectives. The first one is to gain more knowledge on the process of decision making and how to make decisions for the business environment. The second one would be to understand what really data-led decision making means and to compare and contrast data-led and data-driven decision making. And finally, we are going to explore the links between data science and business strategy, basically how to use data analytics to implement successful strategies. Well, first of all, I would like that you clearly understand what decision making means. You must be aware that organizations are constantly making decisions at every single level. So we can find decision making at all the different levels in an organization, from the strategic level to the managerial level to the operational level through daily operational decisions. Generally speaking, decision making in business is about selecting choices between a range of different options in order to meet the business objectives. It means in order to implement the organizational strategy. And keep in mind that decision making is not just about selecting the right choices. It's also about to take the steps to implement that decision. So it is said that unless a decision has degenerated into work, this is not a decision. This is just a good intention. So consider that make a decision implies implement the decision made. So we know better what decision making is. But the big question is how to do effective decisions. We can define effective decision making as the process through which different alternatives are selected and then implemented to achieve the business objectives. So, according to Drucker, effective decisions result from a systematic process with clearly defined elements that is handled in a distinct sequence of steps that we will explain later. Decision making is becoming the basis of competitive advantage and value creation for organizations. Improving decision making could be the key to superior business performance. So, the quality of decision making could become the key differentiator and the main tool to achieve competitive advantages. And this is ultimately the main reason because we are here studying decision making. Because if by using data analysis we are able to improve our decision making processes, we will be in the right way to achieve better and more sustainable competitive advantages. Here you can see the different steps for a systematic process in order to make effective decisions. The first one is to classify the problem. Is that problem generic? Is that problem exceptional and unique? Is it the first manifestation of something else? So we need to understand the nature of the problem. The second step is to define the problem. What are we dealing with? And please don't underestimate these two first steps because to understand the nature and define clearly the problem will help us a lot when trying to find a solution. The third step is to specify the answer to the problem, to define the boundary conditions for the solution. Number four is about deciding what is right rather than what is acceptable in order to meet the boundary conditions. What will fully satisfy the specifications before attention is given to the compromises, adaptations, and concessions needed to make the decision acceptable. Step number 5 is building into the decision the action to carry it out. As we said before, we are not making decisions if we are not implementing the decisions through actions. So we need to understand what does the action commitment have to be and who has to know about it. And finally, we need to test the validity and effectiveness of the decision against the actual course of events. How is the decision being carried out? Are the assumptions on which it is based appropriate or obsolete? By following these steps, we will be closing to make effective decisions. If you remember, in our first session, we said that the ultimate objective of data analysis is to turn data into value. And that value is going to be released through decision making. So obviously data, and particularly the analysis of data, has an impact on the decision making and particularly on making better decisions. Recent studies have identified 5 value dimensions for big data. And for each dimensions, we can find different value directions that help us to detail how the value creation could happen in an organization. So here you have the definition for each of the value dimensions for big data. The first one is information value, which is connected with the generation of new information, the discovering of hidden knowledge that obviously is going to be very useful to support our decisions. The second dimension is the transactional value, which is mainly connected with operational improvements, such as enhance the quality, increase the revenues, improve processes in order to achieve better results and an increased productivity. Then we have the transformational value dimension, which is more connected with generating innovations for products, services, markets, or even business models. The fourth dimension is the strategic value dimension. This is connected with making the organizations more responsive. It means quicker to change and more oriented to improve product or services based on the processing of data. And finally, we have the infrastructure value, which is connected with the development of new applications, tools, and architectures that increase the value of existing infrastructure to face future technological challenges. So, this is basically to use data in the process of continuous improvement in terms of develop our IT infrastructure. From these 5 dimensions of value, we can determine 11 value directions, which are market positioning, market responsiveness, customer loyalty enhancement, skill development, revenue growth, productivity gain, cost saving, decision making support, knowledge discovery, organizational benefits, and IT infrastructure improvement. For each one, you can see here the key features that help us to understand better what are the implications of value creation for each direction. Also, you can check these research articles to know more about value creation through big data analysis. So, it is clear that the potential of value creation from data is there. But we need to understand pretty well how to create value in the right direction within an organization. So the question is how to use data to make the right decisions. And making the right decisions is pretty connected with having coherence and follow the strategic thread. It means at the end of the day, in an organization, the decisions made must be connected with the implementation of the business plan that obviously is based on the business models and the strategy, which is founded on the business objectives. And obviously, everything needs to be underpinned by the vision, values, and mission of the organization. So don't forget that the right decisions are the decisions that are better aligned with the vision, values, and mission of our organization because this will mean that are oriented to achieve the strategy of an organization. And in order to make the right decisions, and particularly in order to make right decisions based on data, we need to have the right culture. Because as you can see, the culture is the conductive thread throughout this process of value creation in an organization. From research in a range of industry, we can observe that the biggest barriers to creating database business are not technical, they are actually cultural. It's quite simple to describe how to inject data into the decision making process, but it's much harder to make this normal, even automatic for the employees and middle managers. So this is a shift in mindset that represents an important organizational challenge, an important cultural challenge. Here you can see 10 data commandments to help create and sustain a culture with data at its core. The first one is to understand that data-driven culture should start at the very top management of the organization. The second is that we need to choose the metrics, the KPI, with care and precision. Third is don't pigeonhole your data scientist. Give them freedom to explore. Four is fix basic data access issues very quickly. Five, quantify uncertainty in your organization. 6. Make proofs of concept simple and robust, not fancy and brittle. It's more important to understand that it's work or it doesn't work. 7. The training need to be offered just in time when this is actually needed. 8. Use analytics to help employees, not just focus on customers. 9. Be willing to trade flexibility for consistency, at least in the short term. 10. Get in the habit of explaining analytical choices. This is very important. People in the organization need to understand why the decisions are made, even when they came from data. Well, now we are going to understand the differences between data driven and data led when we talk about decision making. We can describe the data driven organizations as the organization that collect and collate the data, then they clean and purify the data, and finally follow what data say to make the decisions. So according with that definition, our decisions are exclusively driven by data. The difference is that the data led introduces the human factor to make the final decision. So it means that we are going to collect the data, to clean the data, to analyze them, and to understand what the data say. But at the end, are the human beings who are going to make the decisions. And there is an example because it's true that some decisions are very complex and now we have a vast amount of data that help us to make the final decision. But we shouldn't pass the final decision making to machines, to algorithms, or at least not for all the decisions in an organization, simply because machines don't have yet the understand of the nuances of human emotion, desire, or creativity. So here you can see how a data-led decisions making should work to implement an organizational strategy. So obviously the computers will collect, store, and provide the results, but it's the human who analyze these results, who communicate the results to the rest of the organization, and who finally make the decisions. Well, it's clear that there is an important link between data and strategy, but we need to understand well how to gain advantage to data to implement a right strategy and a data-led strategy. The first aspect that we need to be aware is to decide which are our knowledge performance indicators, because them will help us to implement our strategy. We need to understand the integration of data-led technologies in our strategy. By the use of data-led technologies which strive to augment our intelligence rather than replace our human intelligence. So obviously data analysis helps a lot. But don't forget that there is an inspirational, judgment driven human element to innovation, success, and discovery. And the business leaders shouldn't sacrifice. Think, for example, on the use of data analytics in sport. Of course, we can base a lot of decisions on what data say, but no algorithms of analytics could replace an inspirational talk from a manager to motivate a team. So only a well balance between decisions driven by data and data-led decision making influenced by human elements is the right combination to achieve the success. Here you have some advice for a successful integration of data analysis in an organizational strategy. The first one is to integrate the knowledge performance indicators for machines only for decisions that you can automate. Also, the automation of decision is much better for frequent decisions like operational ones than for less often organizational or strategical decisions. And the third advice is never prioritize more analytics over taking action. Sometimes it's better to test an action to implement a test based on initial analysis than continue with more and more analytics. So here you have three important elements to implement a successful data-led strategy. The first one is to be clear in your strategy and communicate clearly your strategy to the rest of the organization. The second one is to define how you are going to measure the success, which are your KPI, which KPI are going to be integrated in algorithms, and which KPI are not going to be integrated in data analytics. And third is to get granular and data intensive on what drives success. Here you can see a cycle to implement successful data-led strategy. So we need to define clear KPIs to understand pretty well our business, to refine how we are asking our questions to understand our business, to implement impactful analytics projects, to understand which decision must be data driven, and to redefine our KPIs. Sometimes the communication barriers or a misalignment between KPIs or data driven decision and our strategy will bring problems when we are trying to translate our strategy and high level KPIs to specific metrics that can be implemented into data driven decisions. Here you can see some illustration from a business intelligence survey that show how managers consider what is true today and which would be true in the future, connected with the use of data at the core of decision makings in organizations. And finally here you can see which are one of the benefits that a data-led decision making can bring to business organization. So finally, I would like to summarize here the main conclusions of this session. The first one is that decision making in business is about selecting the different choices in order to meet the business objectives and implement the organizational strategy. That we can identify some value dimensions from big data, which are informational, transactional, transformational, strategic, and infrastructural, that in order to be successful on using data to implement our strategy, we need, we need to create a data-led organizational culture. Also, it's important that you understand that data-led decision making obviously exploit the potential of data, but still keep the important decisions to be made at human level. And finally, that we need to understand how to link data analysis with our strategy correctly. And to do that, it can be very useful to decide what KPI and decisions should be completely automated, should be completely data driven, and which one should be data led and ultimately managed by humans. Here you have some bibliography I use for this presentation. So thank you so much for your attention. You can write down your questions in the link that you can find in Moodle. I'm looking forward to seeing you in our synchronous session. Goodbye.